Oh, there we go. 41 verses. That was a long gospel lesson. A little bit shorter, a little bit longer than last week's, which was 37 verses, and we thought that was long. And next week's is 45 verses.
We won't be here that week.
Well, yeah, they really test our ability to stand, which we traditionally do at the gospel, and also to focus. So, why do we read the whole thing? Really, 41 verses? Well, the simple answer is, it's a story. And every detail in the story is important. It reminds me of that hymn we sing on All Saints' Day in the traditional service. It has 7 verses. And we have to sing all 7. Otherwise, you don't hear the whole story of the resurrection. So, we read all 41 verses. And if you were able to focus, you may have noticed that this gospel reading is sort of like a play, a drama, with various scenes. And maybe you were able to think about which scene was your favorite. I'll tell you my favorite scene. It's the one where the formerly blind man gives the Pharisees a theology lesson. He says to them, basically, look, you say that anyone who is filled with sin, God will not listen to that person. And so, therefore, based on your own teaching, Jesus must not be a sinner because obviously God listened to him because I used to be blind and now I see. It's an astonishing thing, he says. You say you don't know where he comes from, and yet I was blind and now I see. Isn't it great? And then they call in the parents and all that. It's a great story. You wouldn't want to leave out any part of it. So we have to read all 41 verses. And that tests us just a little bit, don't you think? All 41. Well, what it means is that during Lent, we Lutherans read more verses from the Bible, especially if you happen to go to a church where they read all 4 psalm lessons, which we don't do, particularly when we have a long gospel reading. But what it means is that we Lutherans read more verses directly from the Bible than some churches read maybe in an entire year. And that's significant. But it's only significant if we're paying attention. And I guess I was paying attention more this time around as I studied for the sermon than I have some years. Because here's what I discovered. I was thinking about 41 verses. People are going to hate to stand for 41 verses. To really read all 41 verses. And I started to study it, and I thought, oh my gosh, we didn't read the whole thing. It doesn't end at chapter 9, verse 41. It continues. The story continues for 21 more verses. So, you got off easy. The next section, this is why it's so important to think about that favorite word of mine, context. The next section is called Jesus the Good Shepherd. Now, it makes sense why we read the 23rd Psalm as one of our lessons today. And in the next section of chapter 10, Jesus is explaining the meaning of the healing of the blind man. Now, I use that word explain advisedly because actually these verses are not that easy to understand. But the thing you have to imagine is the same crowd is gathered. They've all been through this big debate about Jesus and the healing, and then this is what he says to them in part. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd." What Jesus is saying to them is, this man who has now been kicked out, cast out by the Pharisees, this man is one of my sheep. He heard my voice. In fact, he heard his voice before he could see him. He heard my voice, and now he's a part of my flock, where he'll be protected and provided for and loved. In fact, loved so much that I will lay down my life for him. And so the whole story is not just that the man was healed and that he came to see Jesus as being sent by God. But the whole story is that he becomes a part of the flock. He's not just a recipient of the healing of Jesus. He becomes one who believes in and follows Jesus. And so, at one point in his life, when he was physically, literally blind, he experienced life one way. And now that his eyes are opened and Jesus is there, he experiences life a new, abundant way. Remember that line from the hymn Amazing Grace? I was blind, but now I see. So the Lent, the blind man's life, formerly blind man's life, was darkness. Actual, literal darkness, but also spiritual darkness. If you're wondering why I said Lent, it's because during Lent, we've been talking about getting the lint out. How do we get the lint in our lives out in Lent? So, the lint represents, and this is the visual aid, all that gums up, clogs up, gets in the way of our relationship with God. So the first week in Lent, the Lent was the fact that we trust ourselves more than we trust in God. The second week of Lent, the Lent was our tattered and tired faith and our unwillingness to be reborn spiritually because we're too comfortable or too afraid or too apathetic. The third week, last week, the Lent that we were getting out in Lent was all that limits us from being and living the life that God wants for us. And today the Lent is darkness. Darkness. That's not so easy to talk about. What is darkness that we need to get rid of? I don't mean literal darkness, and I don't necessarily mean just our actions or our attitudes or our allegiances. But I couldn't quite figure out how in the world to talk about what the darkness is that we need to get rid of, that gets in the way of our relationship with God and with others. Most of you know I write my sermon on Wednesday. That's the day, if you call, Judy will say, I always say, you either have to be the bishop or dead to talk to me on Wednesday. So, if you call on Wednesday, she'll give you a 10th degree to see if you're actually dying or not. Anyway, Wednesday was coming. I went to bed Tuesday night, and I didn't know what the how am I going to talk about the darkness when I write this sermon? So I go to bed. I wake up in the middle of the night, and the thing that comes to my mind is, you won't believe it, the Star Wars movies. Now, I have no reason for the Star Wars movies to come to mind. Really, I don't. But that's what I thought of. Now, for some of you who are my age or close to my age, the Star Wars movies came out when we were in late high school and college. I think probably around 76, 77, sometime around then. Anybody know? And the rest of you, if you don't remember the Star Wars movies, maybe you saw them on DVD or on, HBO or something at some time. But you're going to help me tell two parts of the story. First of all, in the Star Wars movies, what is the evil element called? The
Empire.
Dark side.
The dark side. And who's the representative? Darth Vader. Can't you hear the music? I can hear it. I can't. That's the good music. And there's bad music. Oh, bad music. See? I didn't do that in first service. So the dark side, represented by Darth Vader. And the dark side is not just generalized evil. The dark side is what happens, is what is a part of us that we would say is represented by negative emotions. Anger, fear, jealousy, greed, that is allowed to become too powerful, so that it sort of overcomes us. We succumb to the dark side, and it puts us on the path of corruption, which is represented primarily by us wanting power for ourselves. That's the dark side. It's amazing what you could find in Wikipedia. Because I wouldn't have remembered that much detail. So, in the movie, not the first one, but the second one, which right now I can't remember, Empire Strikes Back. Well, it's not, they've got all that prequel stuff that I don't understand. But in the Empire Strikes Back, Darth Vader, the representative of evil, fights Luke Skywalker, the representative of light and goodness. Okay, so they're fighting with their lightsabers, right? And Darth Vader telepathically communicates with Luke Skywalker and says to him, "You have conquered your fear, but your anger is there." Something like this. I'm not doing it word for word. I didn't go and rent the movies in preparation for my sermon. But your anger is there. And if you will just, let your anger overcome you, you will be able to defeat me. Of course, something like that. And so, he doesn't do it. He doesn't succumb to the dark side. Yay! He loses his hand or something in the process. And then, though, in the next movie, The Return of the Jedi, once again, Darth Vader is fighting with Luke Skywalker. Isn't this fun? I'm going to get to the point soon. So, they're fighting again, and once again Darth Vader does the telepathic thing and says, and starts to stir up fear in what's his name, Luke Skywalker, that his sister, whose name is Princess Leia, is going to go to the dark side. And so he allows himself to be overcome by his hatred, and he defeats Darth Vader. But the consequences that he's overcome, he succumbs to the dark side. Okay, I'll stop with scenes from Star Wars. Oh, darn! What does all that teach us? It actually does teach us something. Because, you know, we're not having lightsaber fights. But one of the themes of the Star Wars movies was that this was an internal battle that could become external. So, we're not out fighting with lightsabers, but perhaps we are fighting an internal battle with fear, with anger, with greed, with jealousy. And that internal battle, if we allow ourselves to be, we'll use the language of the movie, overcome by those negative emotions, if we allow them to take precedence, then they will become external. And then we'll see them in our actions, in our attitudes, in our allegiances. And then they become lint. They get in the way of our relationships with other people and with God. So how do we get rid of the lint? Well, we don't walk around with lightsabers. But hopefully we walk around with the light. Jesus, the light, also referred to in today's lesson as the good shepherd. He leads us out of the darkness into the light, through the dark valleys, up onto the mountaintop. That's the kind of imagery that's in the Old Testament. He has led us all from the darkness of sin and death to forgiveness and eternal life. And then on a day-to-day basis, he can help us as we struggle. Help us to transform anger into acceptance, fear into trust, greed into generosity, jealousy into gratitude. And we're all part of the fold, so we can help each other. You know, I am kind of wanting to watch those movies again now. But I think there's a real kernel of truth in the fact that this is an ongoing internal battle that can become external. But the dark side, with which we all struggle, is overwhelmed by the light. And Jesus leads us out of the darkness into the light. And the way it happens for us is the same way it happens for the formerly blind man. We see, hear, and follow him. And he does the rest.